Great, thanks, Rob. Hi, everybody. Welcome tonight. As Rob said, I'm going to introduce the SAT. I am actually an SAT instructor for the Princeton Review, as well as I work in national partnerships. And our partnership with Zinch, we like to host these workshops. And I get a ton of questions about them during the workshop, after the workshop, and throughout the year. So there's a lot of information to cover. In 40 minutes, it's going to be hard to cover a ton of information, but I'm going to do my best and then open up to some questions at the end. As Rob mentioned, I'm with Princeton Review. Some of my background is on this slide. I'm not going to bore you too much, but the key here is there's my email address and my phone number. So after the session tonight, if you have additional questions about the Princeton Review, test prep, or SAT, shoot me an email or give me a call and leave me a message if I don't answer that. But as I said, I've been teaching a long time the SAT, and I've been working for Princeton U and helping kids get into college for a long time. Last year, one of my students just got into MIT, so it's real. It's the stuff that I'm going to talk about. It actually works. But one thing I want to warn you on about our agenda tonight: this workshop is not a substitute for test preparation. So if you are a senior and you're taking the test in a month, it's not going to get you to score 300 points higher. What I'm trying to do with this type of workshop is just give you some insight and direction about the SAT and what you can do to improve your score and get you to think a little bit differently about these standardized exams. And I'm doing one on the ACT next week. So if you're taking the test in a few weeks, hopefully you weren't coming here tonight and saying, this was my test prep, and you just gave me a presentation. This is meant for you to take the information I give you, go back and set up a plan for preparation. I'll give you some tips and strategies that will help, but it's just a precursor to your prep needs, okay? So the agenda tonight is to just talk about the SAT, give you some tips and strategy, and then open it up to some Q&A. So that's kind of what we have planned for tonight. So I'm not going to go through what the breakdown of the SAT is. You guys can do that at princeview.com or College Board, but it's offered throughout the year. It's a long test. It's 4 hours, but what I want to focus on, what are those misconceptions about these exams? And I've been doing this a long time, and I still get this from parents and or students. And one of those is it measures your intelligence. Okay, these are the misconceptions, by the way. If I have a high GPA, I'm going to ace the SAT. Heck, that's what I thought when I was in high school. I had a great GPA, but I didn't ace the SAT. You can't learn how to increase your scores, or test scores aren't as important. So these are some of the misconceptions that you're going to hear about these exams, and let me kind of talk to you about what the truths are. First of all, what does the SAT really measure? And it really measures how well you take the SAT. For those of you who are very good students and you're used to your school tests, your high school exams, it's a very different animal. So if you're thinking you're going to go in and ace the SAT, that just doesn't always happen. And sometimes it's a shock to some students, and more so the parents. So one thing to warn you about is if you haven't prepped for the SAT and this happens to you, it's probably because there's some things about this exam that you're just not familiar with. So that's kind of what I'm going to go into tonight. So here's some of the truths. First of all, don't take your test scores personally, okay? If you don't do well, don't think, well, I'm not good enough for college, I'm not smart enough, because it doesn't measure your intelligence. You can be coached to improve your score. I know it for sure because I've been teaching the last 15 years, and on average, I'm improving kids from 400 to 500 points from where they started from. So you can improve your scores. It just takes some discipline, it takes some great methods, and a lot of practice. GPA is still more important than your test scores, but they're still heavily relied on. So those are the testing truths that you have to be aware of. And as I get into this SAT workshop, this is kind of painting my picture overall of this exam in itself. So as we talk about your high school career, again, these test scores are just one piece of this bigger puzzle of when you apply to college. So don't put all your eggs into one basket when you're looking to apply to college. So I want to make sure you're clear on that. This is just one piece of the puzzle. So tonight I'm going to talk about 5 things. And these 5 things, I list them here. This is kind of my teaser slide, and I'll be talking about these 5 things throughout tonight about how you can ace your SAT, or in particular, these are multiple choice exams. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. So let's kind of get into this, the nitty-gritty of that. So here's my first tip to you. And for those of you who've heard me before, I'm going to cover a lot of the same things I've covered in the past because, again, this is kind of the precursor to it. It's not what I teach my students week in, week out, because we go more in depth. But this is kind of the high-level altitude or the service stuff here. So the first thing is you need to understand who you're up against, who's the enemy. And in Princeton Review terms, we term the enemy the people who write the exams. It's not Princeton Review who writes these exams. We write our own practice exams, but we don't write the actual exam. So if you know who they are and what they're about and what this test is about, it's going to help you take the exam. You also need to understand what content is covered. Is there geometry, algebra, what kind of grammar is on the exam, as well as the format of the test. You know, how hard is it? How is it scored? Are there any tricks? Just like in high school, you know, okay, well, there's going to be 50 questions on the test. I get some extra points if I do the work in my math class. You just need to understand how it works. So we're going to get into that right now. I'm going to skip through this. But here's some reasons why the students struggle on the SAT. So in high school, the tests are designed so you can finish. On the SAT, most students rarely finish because they have to rush and there's not enough time to do all the questions. Also, the answer choices are tricky on an SAT. In high school, they're pretty straightforward. Also, in the reading, there's serious time constraints. In high school, you take your books home and you do a report on them. The math covers 4 years or more on an SAT, and it's hard to understand. In high school, it's that one particular year, and it's usually straightforward. So here's some reasons why students will struggle on the test. So as we think about knowing the enemy, I'm going to do a little test for you guys right here. It's going to be a word association. I'm going to say a word. I'm going to show it on the screen. And for those of you, you can actually chat it in if you come up with something. Just kind of want to see what most people are saying. So here's this word association, and it's going to help us understand the test writers. So here's the first word. Peanut butter.
Jelly, 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 jar, sandwich, allergies, jelly, jelly, Nutella.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Here's the second word. Boy.
Girl,
The first
girl,
thing that comes to your head.
girl, 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 guy, immature, girl, 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 man, weird, annoying,
All right.
basketball
Okay.
shorts.
All right. All right. And here's the next thing. I'm going to think of a number, any number you want.
7, 3, 2, 23, 4, 8, 45,546, 4,
Perfect.
4, 7, 1, 22.
All right. That works. And I do this exercise, again, I made these slides before I had the session, and my guess was most people were going to say jelly or bread, and most people were going to say girl. Unless I knew there was more girls at the session, I should have known if I said boy, they would say immature. So I get that too, because I am a bit immature, so I understand that. But knowing that even before and when I created these slides, saying these words, I kind of knew what you were going to say. Because this is the typical person. You hear these words, you say these things. Well, you need to understand, even when you pick a number, most people pick 7 or picked a number, positive whole number. Nobody picked a negative number. Somebody did actually pick a large number, so that was very intriguing. Nobody picked a fraction. Maybe you did. But typically, most students are average in the sense they say the same things. We're very predictable. Because anybody could have picked any words. Most of you probably chose the words that I wrote down there. We're predictable. The thing is about being predictable is the test writers know that. And the test becomes tricky because of our predictability. And so when you go into these exams, and this is how it's very different from high school, because I used to teach math in high school. Well, I want to test what they know. And so it was very straightforward. I wasn't trying to trick them. But on this test, it can be very tricky, and that's why you see a lot of good students or students who maybe understand the question, maybe getting the question wrong because you're actually driven to the wrong answer. Okay, so hold on to what I just said about that. Again, I'm trying to open your mind about test taking, and when you're dealing with the SAT or ACT, these things come to light, and I'll show you in some problems as we get there. The next tip I'm going to talk about is taking the test on your own terms. Okay, you got to understand your personality. It's not just about the knowledge on the exam. It's also about how you study, what works for you, how you manage your test, how you pace yourself. People do different things on tests. So you need to understand that and take it on your own terms. And your terms are going to be different from your friend's terms based on what your strengths and weaknesses are, what your personality is, and you need to understand that because you can't do what the next person is doing because it might not work for you. Okay, so what I mean by that, and I'll show you an example. This is what a math section looks like in terms of how many questions per math section, where the easy, medium, and questions are. And if you didn't know, for example, the math and parts of the verbal or and the reading are in order of difficulty. What that means is, for example, in this middle section here, number 1 is the easiest question in the section, and number 20 is the hardest. In the 18 question one, they do it in kind of groups because there's some multiple choice questions and those grid-ins, and those are done in thirds, easy, medium, and difficult. So the test is in order of difficulty. A lot of people don't know that. And when I said the first tip, which is know your enemy, you need to understand that's knowing your enemy. How is the test laid out? What is the format? If you understand this, this is going to help you take the test. So as we look at this, for example, I was tutoring a student, and we were going over math. And what I noticed about this student was he got a 410 on his math. Okay, but what I did notice he got every single hard question wrong. So in the middle section, if we were looking at that, he got number 13 through 20 wrong, and he got number 2 wrong, number 4 wrong, and number 6 wrong. So what was happening was he was answering every single question, yet he wasn't that capable of a math student. And then the other thing, because he was wasting time on the harder questions, he was getting the easier ones wrong that he even knew how to do because he was rushing. So when we talk about taking the test on your own terms, what I told him was, slow down. I'm not even going to let you do the hard questions because he wasn't a great math student and he wasted all his time on the hard questions. So for him, because he wasn't scoring that high already, he wasn't allowed to do any of the hard questions. So all we did was focus on the easy and the medium questions and gave him more time for those. And he went from a 410 to a 610 in a couple months. Not because he was that much brighter of a math student. It's because he was managing his test on his own terms. And so, in a nutshell, the idea behind that is you need to take the test for you. Now, if you're scoring in the math section under 650, you shouldn't be answering all the questions or even attempting all the questions. It's going to waste your time. So you need to take the tests for you. Now, the kid I tutored last year was going to MIT. His math section was actually high, so he was answering every question. But his critical reading and his verbal section, we needed to kind of adjust accordingly. So when I say take the test on your own terms, you need to take things and factors like that into account. Another tip is what we call process of elimination. Does anybody know, if I didn't show you the answers, offhand the capital of Malawi? And most people don't. But you need to understand in a multiple choice test, all you have to do is find the answer by eliminating wrong answers because you know how to do something. So in the case of something like this, we know it's not A, we know it's not B, we know it's not C, or we know it's not D. So by process of elimination, we find the answer. Now, the SAT is harder than that. Actually, maybe number 1 might be easy like that. But you need to understand there's a couple ways to solve problems. One is solving it, whether it's mathematically, or the other way is eliminating wrong answers. And so when we approach an SAT, you need to have multiple approaches, and that's what we do at Princeton Review. We teach you the concepts as well as strategically how to do things like eliminate or what are bad answers. Okay. Another idea and strategy approach is guessing, and a lot of people don't guess on this test. So let's say you have these 4 questions on your SAT. How many of you would guess? So if you can chat in there, which ones would you guess on? Like number 1 and 2, or just number 1, or none of them, or only 4? What would you guess on if you had this test?
3 or 4, 3 or 4, only 4. Only 4, 2 to 4, all of them, 3 and 4, all of them.
Right.
How you answer.
So we've got a lot of different answers. We got some people that said none, some people that said all, some people said one, some said, 1 and 3 and 4. So as you can see, just in our consensus in just our seminar here, we have people with much different answers. Like, oh, this is what I would do. Everybody's doing something different. The thing is, the strategy we should all take, it should be all very similar. But you need to understand the format of the exam. And when I said know thy enemy, this is part of it. If you're going into the SAT and you don't know how it works, you're going to struggle, or you're not going to get your best chance of earning the highest amount of points. If this was an ACT, you don't lose any points for getting something wrong. So on an ACT, you always guess. But on an SAT, well, how does it work? If you get it right, I'll just go through it. You get a full point. If you leave it blank, nothing happens. If you get it wrong, you only lose a quarter of a point. So if we go back here, for example, a quarter of a point, well, shoot, in 3 and 4, it's 50-50. I should definitely guess. In number 2, it's 1 and 3. I should definitely guess. In actuality, and I'm going to go through this fast, so you might not actually fully understand what I'm trying to say, and this is part of it. You need to go back and understand this, is you should actually guess on all of these. My students guess on all of these questions. Because in number 1, you only eliminate 1. It's actually a wash. You have a 1 in 4 chance, but you only lose a quarter of a point. So my students are very good guessers because we actually work on guessing and how to guess for an SAT. So again, that takes practice as well. So understanding the guessing philosophy and how you employ it takes practice. Me telling you 10 minutes about it right now isn't going to help you unless you actually practice that methodology on the actual test and on actually on actual practice tests before you get into the SAT. It's a very important philosophy. So guessing becomes a very big strategy. So some of the guessing strategies is make sure you cross things out, be aggressive. If you can eliminate some answer choices, you should guess based on that scoring system. So now let's actually take a problem. And if you've seen this problem, hold back your answer. So here was an SAT problem many years ago. It's a number 18. So take a look at it. And I'd like for you guys to take a minute and try it.
All right, I'm seeing a lot of.
Any of you have an answer?
Mostly C's and E's.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for your answers, everybody, and I appreciate. Okay, so let's take a look at it now. Now, again, I've been going through this fast, and this is why my students, we go through 2 to 3 months of this stuff, week in and week out. I went through it in 15 minutes or so, and you're trying to understand exactly and process exactly what I'm trying to tell you. So the first thing is, looking at this math problem, is we've got to rephrase it so we understand what they're asking. So I'm going to rephrase it as in the sense that let's cut the donut with 2 straight lines, and how many pieces are we going to get of this donut? So again, the SAT, it's not that forthcoming in how they give you, a question. So sometimes you have to kind of read into it. So many of you might have cut the donut like this, because I heard a lot of C's. Rob said, oh, C, C, C. Well, that seems very simple. Now here's where it comes in. It's a number 18. And if we looked at that chart, or that where I showed you easy, medium, difficult questions, number 18 would actually fall in the hard area, or the difficult section. If you cut it like this, that was way too easy, and this is where the SAT gets tricky. So on an SAT, if it's almost like that peanut butter jelly word association. They knew you were going to say jelly or say C at number 4, and so really that's not going to be the answer. It was too easy. And this is why the SAT is very tricky. It seemed like the answer, but it's not the answer. So almost, if those of you pick C or pick D or pick E, you probably fall in the average category that maybe you fall for some of these things. So by cutting it, so what I teach some of my students is if that's what you thought it was on a hard one, especially if you're one of those average students, you should probably eliminate it. It's probably not the answer. You don't want to get tricked. Well, if we can get 4 pieces already, then it can't be 3 or it can't be 2 because we already got 4. It has to be bigger than 4. It's either got to be A or B. Now, there's one more thing into this problem that's an attractor, and that's called a leading word, and where they throw the greatest number in here. Well, when somebody reads what is the greatest number, a lot of people are attracted to number 6. So by default, I get 5 as my answer choice. And some of you are going, I don't get it. And that's part of the problem is a lot of students aren't going to get some of these questions on the SAT. Because they don't understand. But if we actually were to get the right answer on an SAT, we'd move on. We don't think, how do you actually cut the donut? It doesn't matter. We eliminated all the wrong answers based on our strategy and what we know about the test. So, but if you really wanted to know how to cut the donut, this is what it would look like. So you kind of got this tangent going on, and you have this little number 2 in there, and there's your 5th piece. When it was on the SAT many years ago, about 98% of the country got it wrong. Most people pick C, a lot of people pick C, some people pick D, so not many people got it correct. It's not really a math problem, but again, you understand how it can be tricky. So I introduced this problem, we call it the donut problem, to make you understand there's a lot of things that go into maybe solving it, which was, you know, if we went the strategic route and try to eliminate wrong answers, it was probably easier that way. To do it that way. I'm going to skip through this because we're running out of time here. So the math in itself, the math is not necessarily difficult. You've had probably everything by the end of your sophomore year or early junior year. Questions are in order of difficulty. Easy questions have easy answers, as we saw in this one. Difficult questions will have difficult answers. And then knowing the order of difficulty is going to help you. So for those students who are not great math students, you probably shouldn't be even attempting the hard questions and focusing on accuracy on the easy and medium ones because you'll have more time with them. So let's look at the more of the content that's tested on the SAT. So let's look at this one, the number 0. What do you guys think it is? What's the answer here? You could chat that one in.
Neither is the most popular answer.
All right. Here's another one. Here we go. The number 0, is it positive, negative, neither, or D or E? Hopefully everybody cares. So how about this one?
Same thing, neither.
Okay. So, well, actually the number 0 it was neither positive nor negative, but is actually an even number. And this is where they get tricky. This is content that's tested on the SAT, but it's content we had many years ago. So if you're in high school now, I mean, the number 0 you had so long ago that you forget things like that, just as well as you probably forget, you know, prime numbers. 1 is not prime, and 2 is the only even prime. Like if you don't remember those things, you're going to get questions wrong, because then what they do is they take that content and they put it in a question. For those of you in pre-calculus, there's no pre-calc on this exam, so you're above the math that's being tested. So you got to clear those cobwebs out of your mind, and you got to kind of go back years to kind of really focus on the content that's being tested. So, you know, there's fundamental math, basic arithmetic, algebra, and geometry. So you got to also review some of that. So content is another piece of the puzzle. The strategy portion, another piece of the puzzle. The third piece to that puzzle, so that slide that had those 5 things, the first one was content. You need to understand the content on it. The second thing was the strategy, the guessing, the pacing, taking the test on your own terms. The third piece of the puzzle is technique. These are methods for solving certain problem types. If you play an instrument or do a sport, like you don't even think it. It's almost second nature. If you're hitting a baseball, the way you hold the bat, the way you hold your stance, the way you step into the pitch, it's a step-by-step approach. That's your technique. Well, there's technique needed for the SAT. You just don't realize it. The way you do a sentence completion, the way you do a shaded geometry question, there are steps. The way you do an average or a ratio problem, there are steps to be done. And that's what we do at Princeton Review. We teach you our methodology that is proven over the many years. My teachers and I, we actually take SATs to make sure these methods work so we can teach them to our students. So I'm going to show you an example of a question. We'll do a math one. Let's see. Okay, here's one. So here's a sample math problem, and we're going to do a technique. Okay, so read the question, and one of the first things I do with my students is we go, oh, 13, is that easy, medium, or difficult? Well, let's just say it's in the 20 question one. So it's probably in the medium range. The second thing I teach my students to do is recognize what type of problem it is. And again, I'm doing this very quickly. I spend a whole 2-hour session just on these type of problems with my class or my students. There's variables in the answer choices. That clues me into that this is an algebra problem. But for Princeton Review, our technique is actually not to do algebra. What we try to do is just do math. We try to actually what we call plugging in. So the thing we're going to do is we're going to cross out in terms of, we're going to use our technique called plug-in, and we're going to pick our own number to solve this problem. A lot of people try to do the SAT algebraically. Well, when you get to harder and harder math problems, it becomes more difficult to do it algebraically. It's much easier to do it as simple math. So what we do with a plug-in is we actually pick a number for X. So let's just say X was 20. So if Eric pays $20, now let's solve the problem. So Lisa, Eric, and Michelle buy a TV. Lisa pays half as much as Eric. So Lisa then would pay half of Eric, which was 20. So Lisa's going to pay 10. So now we're just solving it using simple math as opposed to this algebra in our head that's really confusing. Then we've got to, again, here's where it gets confusing, the SAT gets confusing. It says Lisa pays half as much as Eric and twice as much as Michelle. Well, Michelle's actually only going to pay 5 because it's Michelle. Lisa pays twice as much as Michelle, not Eric. And that's sometimes, again, the wording of the test writers can be confusing. You got to really know all about the test writers and what things they like to pull on you. So if we add all these together, we now have how much the TV costs, which is $35. We call that our target. Again, I teach this over a 2-hour period, not in 5 minutes. What I'm trying to show you guys, techniques are very powerful. It makes an algebra problem much easier by using this technique. So here's the target at 35. So now what we do is we go to all the answer choices and we plug in our 20 for X into the answer choices, and we're looking for the number 35. And voila, we found it. And that's what we call is a plug-in problem. You can actually use this technique on the ACT. You can use it on your SAT subject tests in math. It's a very powerful technique. There's a lot more to this technique, but I just don't have the time to show you guys. But what I want you to understand is using techniques for different problem types is very powerful. So my students, when they see any math problem, they go, it's this type of problem, it's this number, easy, medium, or difficult, and here's the technique I'm going to use to solve it. So they know what to do in every instance. Or if it's in a sentence completion, here's what, it's a 2-blanker, and I do this, and I do that. So those, what we call a technique. Let me see if I'm going to show you, well, we'll do a different, just because of time, we're going to do, we just did this problem. Well, actually, I'll just show you this quickly. Now, here's a math problem. It's a number 16, so it's actually harder than the last one. There's no algebra in it, though, but it feels algebraic. This is another thing we call as a plug-in, but you actually will pick your own, you pick your own answer choices, and you start with the answer choices kind of as your plug-in. You're almost kind of working backwards. That's another technique that we use. Very powerful. I'm not going to do it here, but I want to show you that, oh, this feels algebraic, this feels weird, but you know what? Sometimes we can use our answer choices to find the answer, and I'll use those as kind of those numbers. But I'm going to skip through that. Um, time is just of the essence here because I want to open it up to Q&A too. So let's talk about the SAT critical reading. Probably my least favorite section on the test when I was in high school or even when I teach it, because most students, what they want to do is they want to actually read the passages. That was my mistake when I was in high school. I read the whole passage, The Wonderful World of the Butterfly. How boring is that? But you don't actually need to read the passage. The passage, you need to get right to the questions. Okay, so I'm going to help you right here and right then. So if those of you who actually came on the call and you're taking the test in a month, the key is definitely don't read the passages. Read the blurb, which starts the passage, and then get right to the questions, okay, because the questions are the key. But before you get to the questions, I'm going to show you a method for eliminating answer choices. So here's 5 answer choices, okay? If you guys are in the audience here, which ones would you eliminate? Now, you don't even know what the passage is about, but which ones would you eliminate? And if you don't know, then say, I don't know. But if you know maybe some we would eliminate off the bat, eliminate them.
C, E, B. Seen a lot of C's with a few B's and E's sprinkled in.
Okay. So this is part of a strategic approach as well on the reading part. And the reason I show this to you is knowing the test writers, it kind of goes back to that know thy enemy, is the way the reading is set up is there's so much stuff written down. And sometimes you just don't have time to go back. But if you're reading answer choices, you need additional help besides the passage to help you solve problems. And one of those is understanding what's a very bad answer for the people who write the test. And those are things called extreme answer choices. Here's an example of an extreme answer choice. Is B. So those of you said B, maybe you don't know why, but the reason why is they are never going to say that monuments in the United States they lack true cultural value. The SAT is going to be politically correct, and that's not politically correct. So it's never going to be the answer choice. Like they would never say teachers are worthless. That wouldn't be an answer choice. And so you can use some of this political correctness, these extreme type answers, as a way to help you eliminate. It's a lot easier finding the answer choice of 4 than 5. It's also a lot easier to find 3 than 4. They're not going to say, again, political correctness, let's see a silly boy endure some punishment. They're also something extreme, never be successfully modeled. Never is a very extreme word, or always. You're not going to see an answer choice with the word always in it. You know, it's always, or it's the only way to do something. That's extreme. So these type of tips when you approach the exam are going to help you. Again, it falls under the category of strategy, but there is a technique to the reading section about, for example, some of my students answer the vocabulary questions first because those are the quickest ones you can answer. The other thing, technique-wise, is the reading questions aren't in order of difficulty. They're in chronology, meaning they go from the early part of the passage to the later part of the passage. There's also things like lead words or line references, and those are the best to do first because they're most direct, and that's part of the technique of doing critical reading. But again, in 40 minutes, I'm not going to be able to tell you about everything about the test, but you need to understand is there's so much you can do if you're properly trained and prepared. We coach plenty of students on getting higher reading scores by doing less reading, which is amazing, and focusing on the questions and the questions they should be doing first. So here's another example that the eliminating. So let's say we were down to 2 choices in the first one and the second one. So in the first one, what would you eliminate based on what I just told you about extreme answers and political correctness? What would you eliminate in the first one, A or B, and in the second one, B or C? And there's going to be a lot of you that, and I was like this too, that I can always get down to 2 on reading comprehension, but a lot of times I would get the wrong answer. This helps you when you're down to 2. It can help you eliminate. Rob, do we have any
Yeah,
answers?
I'm seeing a lot of B's here. And then B's, a lot of B's on the first one. Second one, some people saying B, some saying C.
Okay. So in the first one, it's going to be B because there's inevitably. That's an extreme word. It inevitably results. That means it's the only way. And then the second one, in the second question, it's the only purpose. Well, only means it's only one. You only have to find one other purpose, and it contradicts that. So both B's would be eliminated. And you don't even know what the passage is, and you get the answer based on that. So these are ways to help you cope with so many answer choices and so much text. Start eliminating. It's going to help a lot. Again, there's things to be done on critical reading, but I'm not going to show you that right now. Um, Sentence completions, I'll quickly go over this just because we have like a minute or two left before we're going to open it up to questions. But again, very highly technicable, if that's a word, where you would actually use techniques. And some of the techniques, the way I did them when I was in high school was I took every answer choice and I plugged them into the blank. Whichever one sounded the best, that's what I did. But sentence completions don't work that way. It's about the sentences, what words mean, and what this context of the sentence is. So the key here is I have my students, they don't even look at the answer choices. They work the problem without looking at the answer choices by finding the clues in the sentence that tell me what word's going to go in the blank. So the technique that we use is find the clues, pick your own word, and then do process elimination. So that's, again, a quick way to do sentence completions. But I'm going to go and skip through that because I want to open it up to questions. But before I do, the last couple pieces to those 5 things you need to do on a multiple choice test. The fourth one is practice, 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 and analyze your practice. The more practice you can do, the better. It's going to help you feel more confident. You can work on your strategies and your techniques. If you don't take full-length tests, you're going to struggle. You know, people who run marathons, they work their way up to running 2 miles, 5 miles, 10 miles, 15, and then they to build up to the marathon. People who play sports, they practice and then they play the game. So you got to do this practice. It's really important. And you got to work on your timing and analyze what you're doing. I'm still struggling on geometry. I need to work on that. If you get all the algebra questions right, don't focus on those. You're doing fine on those. So here are those 5 things. As I mentioned, I've said this before. You need content. You need to know what's on the test. You need to know there's misplaced modifiers and parallel construction, transition words, etc. The strategy, the guessing, that part of it. The technique, which I showed you plugging in, or finding the clue in sentence completions. Lots of practice and analysis. And you put all this together, you're going to build your endurance because the test is 4 hours long. You're going to build your confidence, and you're going to succeed on an SAT exam. So those are those 5 things, and they're really, really important. So for those of you that are juniors now, you should be taking your SAT this year, preferably earlier than later because the spring gets swamped with APs, proms, and all that other stuff. So earlier the better. For you sophomores, maybe next summer before your junior year would be ideal. For your seniors, you're in it right now. You got to get it done. PrincetonU.com has a lot of great information about your scores and what schools you can get into. So I would highly suggest going there. Here's some great websites. I will make my slides available. Rob's going to send a follow-up email with my slides, the recording, and then just some information on if you want to take a Princeton U program of ours, whether it be a classroom course. We're offering all the people attending tonight a discount on it. So you can email me, but we're going to send that in a follow-up email. The other thing you can take advantage of is take a free full-length test. If you haven't done one yet, this would be great. Go to princetoU.com/events, sign up for a free practice test in your local city, or take one online. The other thing you can do is you can try a sample class, live online class, through one of our platforms that we use, and you get to kind of actually do more problems than I did tonight. So with that said, Rob, let's open it up to some questions. For those that are younger, the SAT is changing. So if your class is 2017 and beyond, the SAT will be changing. So some of this will not apply to you because it's going to have a little different format. So I'm going to put my information up here again too if those you want to follow up with me after the session tonight. So Rob, why don't we host some questions
Let's
and
do it.
kind of get into that.
So a couple of questions on the essay. I'll combine them. Is it okay to make arrows and crossouts when you're writing your essay, or is how you present the essay and making it look clean and organized important? And then similarly, what's the key, or what are some keys to getting a perfect score, a perfect 12 on the essay? Hello? Anthony, can you hear me? Can you guys hear Anthony? I can't. All right, hang tight. He should be back on soon. In the meantime, send me your questions. And I can also answer some of these. So I'm going to go ahead and answer. There's a question about, is there a book you recommend to study from? So what's a good way to study from the SAT? So you can get plenty of books. Generally speaking, I think the best one is there's a blue book of SAT practice tests. These are official SAT questions and official practice tests that you can check out. And those are going to be the best things to look at. Also, Princeton Review has a similar book of SAT review that you can check out.
Rob, sorry, I got disconnected. So
There he
you were
is.
asking me a question about the essay. I missed it.
No
So
problem.
what was the question?
So the essay.
Yeah, I'm hiding. I had to run away. That was too hard of a question. I couldn't answer.
I know. First question, you're out of here. So is it okay to make arrows and cross out, or is presentation important on the essay, as well as how important is spelling? And then similarly, what are some keys to getting a perfect score on your essay?
Yeah, presentation is everything. Don't be crossing things out. You have a pencil, erase it. If you prep properly, you won't have that problem. You're going to know there is a master technique of how to set your essay up, and you need to follow it. I can't do it in a minute here, but some of the keys, yes, is having a well-structured essay. Vocabulary and word usage, the variety of it helps you get a perfect score. Having good examples, a good intro and a good conclusion are helpful. If you write a 2-paragraph essay and it fills up only half a page, it's crossed out and bad spelling errors and you're not answering the question at hand, you're going to get a 1 or actually a 2. The scoring is from 2 to 12. So perfect score would be 12. To get that perfect score, you've got to do all the things they're looking for. So again, preparing and knowing thy enemy, that was my first tip, is knowing what they're looking for when they look at the essay. If they can't read it because you write like chicken scratch, that's going to hurt you, even though they tell you that appearance isn't going to be great. If they can't read it, they can't give you a good grade. So if you write messy, you could even just practice writing neat for 25 minutes. But the essay is probably one of the easiest things to improve your score. I tutored a kid last year, and we got him a perfect score, in about 3 weeks. And because he just did everything I told him he needed to do, so that's part of it. So you can practice. College Board has a lot of sample prompts you can practice on. So good structure, intro, conclusion, good examples, answering the question. So that's kind of what I would go with, and definitely appearance does count.
Okay, great. How about vocabulary? Are there any tips for learning vocabulary, books or lists to look at, and how important is having a good vocabulary and knowing those words?
Yeah, well, the vocabulary is important in the sense that for sentence completions, as you get to harder sentence completions, they have words like impecunious and lugubrious, and if you don't know what they mean, you're going to have trouble answering the questions because you don't know the vocabulary. In reading comprehension, the critical reading section, there's what we call vocab and context. What does this word mean? And you have to go back to the passage, but having a good vocabulary is going to help you. So vocabulary is very important. As far as preparing for vocabulary, for example, in Princeton Review, we give you the most frequently tested words. We don't say study the dictionary. We give you the words that we see over and over again on the SAT because they reuse them quite a bit. So get your hands on a, you know, a vocabulary list from either an SAT book. If you're prepping with us, we give you the word list. That's helpful. When you're just doing work in general, when you don't know a word, look it up. That's going to help you. So the more you read and the more you try to find out words and meanings, it's going to help you for the SAT. The ACT is not as much vocabulary based. The new SATs are going to remove some of the vocabulary based stuff, but it still plays an important role.
Great. How about whether we know to take the SAT or the ACT? How does a student know it's a better exam for them? Any recommendations for students trying to figure out what they should take?
Yeah, well, we've got a couple things. Is I would say, and I'm going to just don't go through my scrolling things. One is you can take a test, take an SAT and take an ACT, and see which one you're better suited for. If you start early enough, if you're a senior, whatever you've been taking now, stick with it. You don't have the time. But if you're younger, you can take both. Or the Princeton Review is the only company. We have a combined SAT, ACT. Instead of taking two separate tests, you take one test. We call it the Princeton Review Assessment. And once you take it, we can determine which one you're better suited for. A lot of students, it's negligible. So whichever one you're more comfortable with or you like better, you stick with that one. And then for others, it's also based on your strengths and weaknesses. So the SAT is more vocabulary based. If your vocabulary isn't as good, you might stick with the ACT. There's more reading on the ACT. There's a science reasoning section on the ACT. So it really depends. If you go to our website, and I'll send you a link in our follow-up email, the difference between SAT and ACT. There are some things, you know, the SAT is a little more tricky, and it can be gamed more than the ACT. The ACT is higher level math, so if you're in a high level math, maybe you're going to be better suited for the ACT. So it kind of goes back and forth. So I would say try both, take a look, read up some literature on it. Those are some suggestions. Take a look at them, and then ultimately it's whatever you think you're going to score better on that you should go for. Where do I have that? Okay, so here's where you could take so Princeton.com events, maybe come to the ACT one, hear how it's, there is a lot of similarity between the two. So I would go to our website, Princeton.com. Again, here's my information.
Great. How much does the SAT or ACT count for college?
Well, there's a host of factors. It really depends on which college you're applying to. Is it private? Is it public? It also matters what other factors you have, you know, what your grades are. If your grades aren't as good for that particular school, your SAT may be able to save you, or your ACT may be able to save you. But there's things from essays and recommendations and extracurriculars. As I started this session off, it's just one piece of the puzzle. So it depends on where you're going to apply to. If you're applying to a large state school, it might be something that cuts you off. If you don't fit in this range, they're not going to look at you because they get 50,000 applications. I mean, I'm in California here, and UCLA is not too far from me. Well, they get thousands and you know, nearly 100,000 applications. They got to find a way to eliminate people. And if people have a 1,200 on the SAT, they're going to eliminate them right away. So it can affect you by your chances of being looked at.
Got it. Any ideas for what a student should do the day before the exam? So how should they prepare the night before, the morning of, any kind of last minute things that'll help them be successful?
Well, if you're scrambling, then you know you've prepped the wrong way, because you shouldn't be under, like, the last day before, you should be like, deep breath, maybe you pull out some of your vocabulary, but you should have done everything you've needed to do, and you shouldn't be kind of cramming like I know I did when I was in high school or in college and stuff. But you know, prepping for the SAT is it's not a sprint. You know, you've got to have paced yourself out over months and months. So the last day before, you got to get a good night's sleep, have something good to eat, follow your routine, You know, I wouldn't be staying up late and doing things that are going to affect you the next day. Don't eat a food that doesn't sit well with you, that just doesn't make any sense. You want everything to go right, so you got to do those things that work with you. You got to know yourself. So as far as the prep part of it, you know, you can maybe do a time section here and there, but you should have done that weeks prior and months prior, so you're ready to go. So if the person who asked the question is in the position that you'll be taking it soon, and you're starting to worry, then you need to start working harder now, so that last day you're ready to go and you know what you need to know. But yeah, probably the vocabulary the last day, maybe a time section. That's about it.
Okay, great. Any recommendations for the improving sentences portion of the test? Should one simply play them by ear or try and really learn all the grammar rules? Is there an easy way to memorize them?
Yeah, well, the grammar rules, there's not that many, from, you know, misplaced modifiers to pronouns to, so I have my students, we teach them all the grammar rules that are tested. There's not that many. So once you know those, it's going to make everything in the grammar portion much easier. So you need to understand, again, that's part of the number one thing, the content. You need to know the content tested. You don't need to know the name of it, misplaced modifier, but you just need to be able to recognize it and make the change to that. So, so I would recommend understanding the grammar tested and how to recognize that in each of those error IDs, improving sentences. So there's a couple different areas, but they use all those type of errors. And once you have that, there is some small techniques you can use, but the first key is understanding those rules.
So ideally, how long should a student plan to prepare for the SAT? When should they start? And a lot of questions asking the difference between getting a tutor versus taking a class, doing something online, or just getting a book. Can you just briefly discuss kind of the differences of those options?
Yeah,
The grand
sure.
overarching.
Well, yeah, the grand overarching thing is, one is, where do you want to go to school? So what's the goal? So here's a slide here I have, and just list a bunch of schools. You can find out whatever your school. So find that average score of that school. You know, so the kid I was tutoring last year wanted to go to MIT. Well, he needed to break 2100. He was below 1900. So, okay, here's my goal, is to break 2100. Then the other thing is, what's my baseline, or where you are at currently. The only way to find out where you're at currently, which is a big mistake a lot of students make, is they don't know where they're at. They just go, I want to go to this school, I want to go to UCLA, and they don't know where they're at. You need to find out where you're at. So if you're at 1800 and you want to go to 2100, that gap in between, so 300 plus, will determine kind of your prep needs. If you're very close and you're 30 points away from the goal you need, then a book might suffice. If you're 500 points away, I had a kid last year who wanted to go to USC, and he was over 500 points away. Well, you know, a high-intensive program all summer long is the way to go. You're not going to do it by buying a book. So you need, everybody, it's going to be different. So what's going to work for you, and also what works for you. Some people, it doesn't work in a big class. Well, if, you know, in our classes, they're not big, but 12 students or 10 students. Some people like the one-on-one, which is sometimes more effective. So it really depends on the gap or your goal and where you're starting at. So what I recommend is get your baseline, take a free practice test, get a score. Then look at the schools you want to go to and what kind of scores they're looking for. That gap will determine. And then it's a matter of, you know, choosing what works for you, that works for your family in terms of financial aspect with that. But one of the biggest mistakes students make, they don't take a test, they don't know where they're at, and they just say, I want this score because I want to go to this school, and they don't have an idea of what it's going to take to do that. So the kid I tutored for MIT, is we worked all summer long. He did everything I asked of him. We went through our whole Prince Review stuff. He did all these. He did 6 practice tests. So by the time he took the SAT in the fall, he had taken 6 already. He knew what he was up against, and he improved nearly 400 points and he got his 22 something or whatever on the SAT and he hit his goal. But I've had other kids that go, I want to go to this school, and they don't do the work necessary to get that score. Or they buy a book and they think that's going to cut it, and it doesn't. So just got to be careful.
A lot of questions about how many times should I take the SATs. I hear 3 times is a good number, or should I only take it twice? And then similarly, can colleges see how many times you take it and how much that factor into your decision, how many times you should take the exam?
Right. Well, I like it for my students to take it once. I say prep for 1, plan for 2, leave time for 3. It's the second question here. Okay, students have taken it 3 times and to no adverse effect. Some schools take your best score, some take the best from each sitting, your best math from your best reading. You need to find out what schools you're applying to and how they work it. But the mistakes students make are they go, oh, I'll just go in and take it for real. Oh, I didn't like that score. So you paid money, you put it on your record, and you didn't do anything to do that. That's the first mistake. You can take a free practice test with us and get a score. You don't need to go take it for real. So when I say prep for 1, if you're going to go and take it, you're scheduled for an actual SAT, you should prep for it in whatever way, some way. Take a class, buy a book, but you got to base it on what your goal is and be done with it. Why drag this out over a year? But you can take it multiple times with no adverse effects. But I've known people who've taken it 5 times. Well, if I'm an admissions officer, that person does not look good. They look obsessive to me. I'd rather have them volunteered somewhere than take the test so many times and spend a year and a half taking tests all along to just improve 50 more points. Because if they've done it wrong 3 times, they're probably going to do it wrong the 4th time. So why waste time, money, and energy? So what I suggest people is prep for 1, plan for 2, leave time for 3, and leave time for 3 in case you need to bump it up or maybe you're going to get a scholarship. So you want a 3rd time to just have it. To leave time for 3, that means you start your junior year. You take 1 in the fall, you take a 2nd in the spring if you have to, you take another in the senior year of the fall. But that's still, in my opinion, too many times. 2 max. My students will take it 2 max.